Hey, welcome lovers of product. I'm here with Jeff Lopes, UX Director at PagerDuty. Jeff, could you give us a little of your background?
I've been in UX design for the better part of my professional career. I was sort of in the right place at the right time. Back in the 90s, I was working at a company called SAS that's in Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill part of the world. I had gone to grad school at Chapel Hill, and some friends of mine worked at SAS. It seemed like a very interesting and kind of idyllic place to start one's career. So I was doing technical writing there. And a couple years into that role, user experience, although I don't think it was called user experience quite yet, started to be a thing. So a couple of our software development teams were reaching out for anybody who felt like they had a kind of a creative skill set that they might be able to blend into a group of engineers and start making those big gigantic buttons from the early days look as good as they could, you know. So it was a really limited palette of things that you could actually affect UX-wise back then, but it was the start of something that, you know, grew and grew and grew. A few years later, I joined Autodesk and relocated back to San Francisco. And I spent about 15 years at Autodesk, going from being sort of like junior designer on the AutoCAD team to becoming a design leader at the company, and even I ran a product management team as well as various UX teams over those years. Lots of different products. And in the last like 4 years, since leaving Autodesk, I've done mostly startups, and PagerDuty is one that's really kind of captured my interest and attention career-wise.
Awesome. So what makes you so passionate about user experience?
I think, you know, I still love what I loved at the beginning of this journey, which is it enables a person who's got, say, a creative and a pragmatic side to do something professionally that's actually kind of noble. Like, you don't have to pick, am I going to be an artist or a writer, and sort of play to my creative side only, or do I abandon that and just try to do something really practical that seems to make more sense career-wise. With UX design, I think you blend those two things, and you know, each person has a different sort of, you know, amount of each of those two sides. But I think any good UX designer is both a technologist and a creative.
Okay. Do you consider yourself a product person?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always been part of a product team, even when it's been part of a larger engineering organization. I have from time to time, actually at Autodesk a couple times, I reported directly into engineering. So UX was really closely aligned with engineering. And you know, there are pluses and minuses to an arrangement like that. I think that a close alignment with engineers is useful for UX because relationships with engineers are traditionally harder to cultivate than relationships with product managers. So when it's built in at the organizational level, it just helps, like it bridges some of that gap. At PagerDuty, we're part of the bigger product organization, but you know, it's a relatively small company still, so there aren't these big gaps between, you know, one part of the company and another. We're all working together on Scrum teams every day.
Awesome. So Jeff, talk to me about how you work with product management.
Well, my team is I guess you might say we're a centralized UX team in that we all report up to me. It's a group of about 10 folks, and we have dotted line relationships to various other places. Mainly, each designer is closely associated with a particular product delivery team, which is one or more Scrum teams. We begin really early in the sort of planning and early execution stage of a project. A UX designer assigned to a project starts to work really closely with whoever the main product manager is, and they partner on doing early research, lots of customer interviews, discovery. Usually the UX person takes the lead with doing the analysis of all that research, you know, facilitating sessions aimed at going from lots of disparate information to themes and areas to focus on that kind of help build the plan for the rest of the project. And then UX designers, although they rotate around from time to time, they often have a pretty strong relationship with a specific product manager or a specific delivery team. They may stay for a year or two with that same group. So they build up a lot of relationships and sort of currency with those folks. Is that kind of what you meant?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one thing, it reminded me of a thought I had the other day. You were talking to me about data-driven design, right? Can you explain to people what that is and why it's important?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's become much more of a real thing in the last couple of years, thanks to products like Penda that give us so much data to work with. Earlier, like if you asked me 3 years ago about data-driven design, I think we were able to do it, but it was really hard work. It was like archaeology and things like Google Analytics. And you'd have access to Google Analytics or Segment or just various types of data stores. Often it required the help of someone else who could write queries for you. Yet it has been part of the practice for a number of years now. You are expected as a UX professional to bring data and analysis into your work. Data is the currency that you need when you're prioritizing limited resources, time. It's the same currency used by engineers and product managers, so it's really critical that UX designers participate in that same kind of conversation using the same currency.
Yeah, and it tightens that relationship with product management, I imagine. So you've done a lot of really cool things in your career. You've worked for some amazing companies, like you mentioned, SAS, Autodesk, PagerDuty. What are you most proud of?
You know, actually, I am most proud of the individuals and teams that I've had the opportunity to manage and mentor in their careers. I actually have a number of really, pretty close friends from years of saying yes when people knocked on my door who were doing some other function in the company and said, I'm really interested in UX design. Can I talk to you about it? So real honestly, I'm not sure why, but some of the best people that I was able to mentor into UX and then UX leadership roles over time came from other groups. I'm not saying that you can't do that as a UX person to begin with. Most people probably do come up in that traditional way. But now those folks are running their own UX organizations in places like MuleSoft and Metromile, Symphony, Autodesk, Salesforce. So it's really gratifying for me because I like, and my leadership style is to empower other people to become the best that they can become, or whatever it is they want to become. So people's careers have always been, really important to me as a measure of my own success.
That's noble. It's awesome. It's good to hear that. It's always great. I mean, when you're working so hard, working with great people makes it a lot better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wouldn't be worth it if you weren't surrounded with good people.
100%. We were talking about great teams. What do you look for when you hire?
I look for a number of things, but there's a few characteristics that I think are just essential, at least for me and the teams that I want to build and cultivate. A person has to have curiosity, and that shows up at the very first interview. It's either there or it's not. Tremendous empathy, right? I mean, you can't be in the UX business without being a professional empath, right? You have to be really good at getting not just with customers, but like layers into their lives, their work lives, their problems, their aspirations, all those things. And then lastly, humility, because honestly, nobody likes a UX designer who has to have things his or her own way, who toots their own successes too much. It's really a group sport, and the best UX designers are the ones that are able to interact with other people around them, other designers, other functional collaborators, and help bring out the best in the group. It's much more important to have a strong group than any one individual.
I like that. I like that approach to building teams. Do you have any other words of wisdom you would impart to UX leaders or UX people in general?
I really believe that recruiting the right people is half the battle, right? So I've always invested quite a bit in recruiting specific things that I'm looking for. Lately, I'm much more involved with creating an inclusive and diverse sort of workforce, not just for my team, but for PagerDuty as a whole. And I think we saw at SaaStr a big focus on those things. I attended several sessions that focused on techniques and trends about that. Getting the right people onto your team is the first thing, but then giving them the tools, the encouragement, the opportunities they need to be able to flourish in your company, in your environment. That's the other thing that you can really give people, right? So having a regular, direct discourse about things that are working, things that you observe, not waiting for the annual review or the semi-annual review, but just making that part of your everyday conversation with people is really useful. And then, kind of get out of their way. Let them do what you hired them to do. Let them show you what they're capable of doing and surprise you with the things that you didn't know they were capable of.
Looking forward, looking in the future, what trends do you see that they need to be aware of? What big trends are on the horizon?
I think there are two trends that sort of I'm really aware of and working with. One is not so much about individuals, but it's about where UX and UX meet engineering are right now, which is you see the rise of the design systems. So but lots of companies right now are involved with design system projects. I don't want to spend too much time on design systems, but basically it's a evolution towards less individualism and more practice-driven consistency in the way that your product is presented to your customers. That's nice because consistency has always been a way that you can create a handshake with customers if you train them to do that your product is going to behave in a certain way and you consistently make sure that happens in the product. It accelerates learning, it builds trust, it helps your brand value. A design system is like that on steroids because it builds in at a programmatic level a level of consistency in both, sort of at the widget level, but also at the bigger component level, the way that screens are laid out, etc. And the other trend that I see is in the last couple of years, there's more and more expectation that a UX designer can code. And that has not always been the case. In fact, there's a school of thought that UX designers that can code is not a good thing. Like, you can't become as good as possible at the other parts of UX design if you have to, spend as much time as you need to learn how to code. And that there's even kind of a conflict of interest if you know how something needs to be coded. But I think that has really changed dramatically in the last couple of years. You have boot camps like General Assembly and others where, in a 12-week immersive class, you can go from whatever you're doing in your career to being actually ready to go into the workforce as an entry-level UX designer or even a front-end coder. So the lines have been blurred quite a bit, and now when I talk to engineers on various teams at PagerDuty, there's a lot of interest, a lot of enthusiasm for leveling up all of the UX designers to be able to do certain kinds of coding, like to be able to code your own front-end stuff and work in GitHub. So, doing pulls and pushes and having things reviewed in the same way that our engineering groups do. And then also to be able to create real working prototypes of your design instead of just handing over mock-ups with specific annotation of how many pixels to the left or right or what's the hex value of the color. To just provide it yourself and let the engineers do the more heavy lifting of hooking things up.
Yeah, the whole world's going to be coding soon. I hear that's a trend.
Yeah.
Designers, product managers, there's a big conversation around should product managers come out of, be technical.
Yeah.
And I think an argument is at least they should have a little bit of that background.
It doesn't hurt. Just even as a way to understand what you're asking someone else to do on the team.
Absolutely. It establishes credibility, I think, a lot. So one final question for you. 3 words to describe yourself.
Yikes. I'll stick with curious, because I have to lead by example with that. I'm also incredibly grateful for all the opportunities that I've had in my career, and just to be able to continue to participate in such an interesting place, right? To be in a really high growth startup in a place like San Francisco in the year 2018 is, something that I didn't really imagine when I was in college or grad school, thinking I was going to be a musicologist or a linguistics professor. So it's been nice to be surprised by where I've gone with my own career. So that's two. Grateful. Humility is also something that I personally try to inhabit. I just don't think there's a lot of value in becoming my own champion all the time. I like for my groups to be the reflection of my own success, my teams, and the work that we create together.
That was great. Thank you. I appreciate all your time.
Thanks, Eric.